thank you for joining.
I'm happy to be here.
What I'd like to do is just kind of step back and really, in a quick way, but get your experience on, like where you went to school, how you got into entrepreneurship, and how you ended up starting your own company.
Sounds great. So I got a PhD at Stanford, and I then worked for Intel, for an Intel lab for about a year, and I became a professor at Carnegie Mellon about almost 10 years ago. I was there for about 8 years, and I moved to the University of Washington about a year ago. So I've been an academic basically my whole life in a way. But maybe 5 or 6 years ago, we had some algorithms and we had some methods in the lab, and I kind of wanted to see what would happen if I tried them in the real world.
Interesting.
And what that process would be like. And I never thought I would start a company. I kind of stumbled upon it by coming up with some things that were popular and that people thought were interesting. And in that process, I found a really great co-founder, and we started a company together. And it was challenging, but it was exciting. And that was our first company, and that was a very interesting road, and I learned a lot. And in parallel, at the university, we started an open source project about 7 years ago called GraphLab. And that open source project just grew up on its own just totally organically, without any kind of marketing or push. And about a year ago, I decided to make that its own company as well. So two very different experiences. But again, very rewarding in that process too.
So I'm curious, coming from, more or less being in the education world or at a university compared to an entrepreneur, those are like two different worlds.
You want to know how
me
the
what's the connection there?
So the truth is, if you're a professor, you're an entrepreneur. It's maybe a slightly different type of entrepreneur, but you're raising your own money to pay your research lab.
That's absolutely true.
You're getting your work validated by peers and by users of sort, and you're fighting to get that good idea that's going to change the world. So a professor is an entrepreneur. Perhaps the difference is the scale or the time horizon of the ideas being discussed and what happens with those ideas in the long run. But I think in that sense they're very similar, and that's what kind of attracted me to doing both.
Being a professor or being in that that area, and then what was the one decision or the major decision that you're like, I need to go commercialize this, I need to go see what happens here? What was that one thing that you felt like maybe switched?
It's interesting, for the two companies that I've done so far, the decision was quite different. So one of them, the first one was, we had an algorithmic idea that was beautiful and that I thought could have a huge impact into understanding what people wanted from the web and how they could get what they want based on their experience interacting with systems. And I thought, I would like to see this as a much bigger scale than I could right now. And that was fun. That was our first project, Flash Group. With the new company, GraphLab, it was a very different kind of experience. We're running a large open source software project out of a university. I couldn't give my students PhDs for answering all the email they were getting. And I just couldn't support a project of that scale with the resources that I had. And so between that and seeing an opportunity in the real world, outside of academia, let's say in industry, for doing more of their data, which is what we're doing, seeing that opportunity to bring out machine learning just felt right. There was a customer pool, there was demand, and it was a little different, but it was a kind of fun in different ways.
And so was that, as you explained, as a professor, you actually you raise money, you go find, the students and essentially like customers, if you will. Do you feel like making that transition, you maybe it was a little easy for you to make that transition and find investors? If you did you find investors?
Yeah, both times.
Okay.
It was hard. Mistakes were made,
for
as
sure.
they say.
If you could go back, just to kind of go there for a second, because this is what we do. We talk about, the experience. What were the maybe few things that you identified that if you did make mistakes and if you could go back now, say, man, maybe I could do that differently.
And my model of the new company that I have is to only make new mistakes. If I can succeed,
don't repeat the first one.
Yeah, if I can succeed that way, that'd be great. Many of these mistakes are obvious, but you don't realize them until you're inside of it, right? So, for example, having a customer focus and getting your product out there as early as possible, and then listening to that feedback and using it to change the product. It's the kind of the most obvious thing that everybody will say about your startup. But when you're inside it, when you're acting and building something and you have an idea, you think you're doing all those things.
Yeah.
But you're not really doing them.
Do you think it's because it's easy to get so inside your head and you're internally focused and you're just thinking, it's like you know your product and your company so well that there's blinders? I mean...
There are different kinds of blinders, right? There are blinders on the side and there's blinders ahead of you. So what I mean by that is, on one side, there are opportunities that you're missing on the side, or things that come swipe from the side that you're missing. But the blinders ahead is a question of, or a big mistake that we made is repeated again, which is putting your head down and just running with what you have. And pushing that idea as much as you want and as much as you can to make it beautiful before you show it to anyone. And this is a standard mistake, right?
Yeah.
That's I'm hoping to make fewer of. So, for example, I'll be embarrassed. This is a standard tagline for startup. I'll be embarrassed if anybody sees this version of the product. Right? and then that's when it's obvious. But you say, okay, if only it was a little nicer, people would actually use it. And all those were mistakes where I was just focused on kind of the smaller changes to the product or the engineering plan that we had or kind of the vision that we had right now, and perhaps not what was the market pull, what was the need that's being fulfilled.
And so you're saying get it in front of customers as soon as possible, get their feedback, watch them use it. Is that the things that you're saying, just get it as soon as possible out there?
Get it as soon as possible out there is a must.
Yeah.
The other part of it is you have to believe in your vision, right? So not necessarily listen to what people are saying about it, but how they're using it, right? And then listening to that feedback. Because the second mistake or another mistake that you can make is to say, nobody's using this thing or they don't understand how to use it. It's their problem. They're stupid. Right? The customer is stupid, or
they don't know what they're talking about.
They don't know what they're talking about. Yeah. Or you say something like, and I'm being a little bit hyperbolic here, just for emphasis. Clearly, you don't say your customer is stupid, but you have to own every problem. For example, if you're talking about a user experience, every piece of the user experience that is bad, you have to own as a company. And you either say, okay, I'm not going to address this, or because I don't have time, because it's not priority, because of this, or I'm going to go and do something about it.
Yeah.
And it's easy to think about this from a user experience. We can think about more generally my go-to-market strategy, my product development strategy. And I think what we have to do is be data-driven about every aspect. And some things are interesting. So, for example, the first company I started, we have this great idea. People want, for example, their news to be personalized. And so why don't we talk to newspapers and work with them? And they're great and they're willing to work, but that's an industry that has lots of free cash to support a startup, right? So it's interesting that some of those business decisions, those technology decisions that you make have some business impact. And what I didn't have the right foresight, maybe at the time, and what we could have done better, is to kind of understand what is the end-to-end process between now and being successful, and how can I validate every step, how to make sure that, for example, there will be money on the table for some of the things that we wanted to do.
So maybe said a different way, finding the customer and the business model, and testing that quick as possible, right? That's and great, then keep what works, take away what doesn't, but just iterate on that.
I think that's a great idea. for some types of companies. But you can't underestimate adoption, right? So that's the other part of this, right?
Yeah.
So there's also, of course, the model that says if people come, like Facebook, right? So if users come, money will come later.
Yeah.
And everybody's very dismissive of Facebook, including me. But now, in the last was a quarter or something, we know that they've been doing tremendously well, finally, right? And so if I look at what we're doing now with GraphLab and the advice I've been getting from a lot of people, the push towards moves that either increase adoption or increase or validate the business model are two pushes that should be going side by side.
Absolutely.
In a very effective way. And I would like to make new mistakes in those areas, but I'm working on that.
So going back, how did you meet your co-founder and how did that all work out?
The first company I had, I met my co-founder through the university actually, and in GraphLab, my co-founders are also from the university. Okay. So, the university is this place where a lot of ideas get tested out and incubated in some way, and maybe they get paid by, the taxpayers. And we train students and so on in that process, and we, discover new things about the world. But it's been a very good source of kind of intellectual development, motivation, connection, and collaboration for me. So that's been my source.
Yeah. And what would be your advice on if, let's say an individual, maybe they're non-technical. Actually, it doesn't really matter, they're technical or non-technical, but they have an idea or they want to start something and they can't necessarily find a partner, or they're having trouble finding a co-founder. What directions would you point someone, or what would be your advice on that?
Interesting. So just to be honest, it's not the same as my experience, that experience, right? But one thing that I've really enjoyed so far in Seattle has been the kind of tech community that's built around here. And I think the tech community is good in all sorts of ways. So I always thought about it before I was part of it as like a networking place for getting a job, for example, right? But it is a great place to validate ideas, to get new ideas, to have a beer with somebody in chat. And I think the interesting thing about technology is that technologists tend to be people who are maybe more introvert.
Yeah.
And by becoming an entrepreneur, you have to find that extrovert side in yourself.
Yeah.
And nothing like a tech meetup to start practicing those. Like,
Go
training
talk
wheels.
To people.
Because, everybody there's an introvert. And like everybody's trying to discover the extrovert inside themselves. And getting yourself out there, it's an amazing thing. It's kind of like when you start dating, and you kind of have to do the same thing. You have to get those no's.
You got to take the no's.
You have to take no's.
What's funny is, you hear this sometimes where people they maybe are hesitant to share their idea, and they're questioning, they do grab a beer with someone or they're talking about their idea. They might be hesitant because they want to keep it to themselves. Yeah. What do you think? I mean,
what do I think of that? There are different types of people.
Yeah.
And one of my entrepreneur friends in the Seattle area who has a pretty successful company holds his cards really closely, and my cards are all on the table.
Yeah. And
different people are quite different in that way. My gut feeling on things is if your idea is so obvious that somebody just by having a beer with you is going to scoop you, then perhaps it's not like a company's worth of idea. And so you're better off getting that feedback, making those connections, and just putting yourself out there than just hiding everything and
yeah, I think you're totally right, because look, Google anything, right? Google, there's always going to be someone doing something, or you can find a way to maybe reverse engineer something. I really think that at this point in time, execution is pretty much the name of the game. I mean, obviously you have to have the right team. You probably have to have some funding behind it, but really it's execution. So I find that it doesn't really matter if you do tell people, it's more or less, what are you going to do with that information once that you have it in your brain, right?
Right, exactly.
Okay, well,
so execution, I see execution as what's between us and success, to be honest.
Yeah.
But yeah, the ideas are all out there, and I think and again, this is an academic thing, right? Where I grew up in an environment where you're about sharing your ideas and getting that feedback early. The other part of getting feedback is that it gets you past that kind of introvert state, because you gotta hear a lot of no's, be it when you're trying to hire people, getting funding, getting customers. Every process, a successful entrepreneur is going to be somebody who is going to take no and still keep going.
So going off that, when do you know it's time to either change course or shut down? Like when
for a company, right?
Yeah,
that's a great question, right? Or stay the course for that matter, right? So you can stay the course, you can change courses, you can shut down. It's hard, and I have to say that I've never been known to end a relationship too early or something, be it in personal sense and work sense. Like, I think it's a human mistake to keep going too far in things. So one interesting thing about getting your ideas out there and seeing what sticks is that you get that feedback early, and you can try many things and try to focus on the most successful ones and iterate. And if you can do that well, a pivot doesn't feel like a pivot as much. It feels like it was just a natural next step in the exploration process.
Okay, the market's telling us this, we go this direction. I think what's
the
difficult...
hard thing, the hard thing with that, and one of the biggest challenges I found in as an entrepreneur is the opposite of that, is how not to flutter in the wind. In other words, you meet, and this is a problem I had in my first startup very significantly. You meet with a client, potential client, and they say, if only your product did X, we would be all over it. And then you come back to the I said lab, no, that's like whatever your company, right? You come back to the company and you say, stop the train, you pull the big lever.
We're doing this
now. And then, next week you talk to this other customer, if only your product did Y, we'll be all over it. You come back and say, stop the train, let's do Y. And so the hard part, and there's no formula that I know of, is to be able to balance the stopping the train, change everything with kind of reacting to customer needs. And in a sense, you have to trust your gut, but be open to hearing the no. Like, you really have to internalize the no's and then decide, I heard you, I understand that we're not going to be able to do X, but you know what? We're just losing this customer, but we're going to stay on their mission.
And I think part of it's measuring things, right? Like you hear one, and you're talking about just like a customer, but what if 10 customers say that, or 100, right? And then you're like, okay, the market's telling us this, or our customer base is telling us this, so... Right, like
right. So yeah, I know I built, like, before previous company, like a consumer-facing product, and 1,000 people go try it, and like nobody hits the sign-up button. You're doing something wrong.
Something's wrong there. Yeah.
Right. So there's some signals there. I would say impossible to ignore, but we end up ignoring them. But I shouldn't have ignored certain signals in retrospect.
Yeah. And in terms of like building a team, so you met your co-founder at the university and same experience as you, but how did you go about, finding the right talent to actually execute on what you were looking to build?
Right. Finding talent is hard.
Yeah.
I mean, we all know this, right? So I'm sure everybody who hopefully is watching this, if you're having a good user experience with them, are having trouble finding talent.
Yeah.
And there are some standard ways that, networking, advertising, and so on. And I think, you got to do those. You got to do those. But the one kind of delta that has been really amazing for me in the last several months in this company is empowering the people in the company to find new people. In other words, that kind of multiplier effect to say, like, if you hire good people, they're going to bring good people with them.
Is it more like, who do you know? Who's the smartest person you know?
Who are the people, or just everybody should know what the hiring priorities of the company are, and everybody should be looking for those people.
Yeah.
like every single person in the company should feel like they want their stock to be worth a ton of money, or they want their company to be full of brilliant people and exciting people to work with, and they should be working on hiring.
Yeah.
And there shouldn't be a division between, I'm the HR person, I'm the boss, I'm this. It's like everybody's hiring all the time. And that's kind of the model that I think is a little different. But you still have to do the legwork.
Yeah.
You still have to go beat the bushes, play some ads, go through a lot of like useless resumes, lose people to other companies and all that stuff. Yeah.
I mean, it's part of the game. But how do you mitigate someone just wanting to bring their friend along and not being someone that maybe is as high a standard, talent-wise that you would want to have on the team?
So this is a interesting question. So it's a question of process in a way, right?
Yeah.
So you don't want the process to be, I bring person X because I've decided. Not even the CEO of the company should be able to take somebody and place it in the company.
They should go through the process.
They should go through a process that gets buy-in for everyone. And you're not running a democracy necessarily, but you need those people to feel like, oh, there's an excitement about, we just hired Alice and it's awesome and can't wait until she quits her other job and is here. And like we're all like, eager and waiting.
So what is the right process? I'm sure you have one, but what is the process that you would take if, an employee of yours brings someone to the table and says, hey, Alice is, I think she's great. She should. What is the interview process? Do you do like group interviews? Do you do like multiple days? Like what type of process that you go through?
I can't say that we have an amazing process. We're a small company. We have about a dozen people in there. But what we've done is have those people talk to pretty much everyone, as many that we can. Some of those are small group interviews. Some of those are one-to-one.
Yeah.
And that process of having somebody come in, at least in a company of our size, and meet everyone, serves two purposes. It shows that person, shows Alice that our company is composed of a dozen of exciting people, interesting people that she could interact with, and gets everyone to buy into Alice if she's the right person for the company. But one thing that I think you didn't ask, which I think is a perhaps more interesting question about hiring when you try to be inclusive, is that not everyone understands the hiring priorities in the same way. Mm-hmm. So in other words, Alice might be great at one part of the business, but not the other part of the business, and we don't want that person, the other person, to say, I'm not hiring Alice because she doesn't know my side of things. So the buy-in, the cultural buy-in that you need is to say, there are different skills, and what we're trying to build is a rounded group. Yeah. And as a CEO or a leader in the company or somebody you're hiring, it's your job to say, Alice comes in with these kinds of skills that we really need. So can we check if that's the kind of person that we want for that type of job? And then you get buy-in from people in general.
How important is culture to you as opposed to like a talent set or a skill set?
So we passed on people who, how can I say this, are brilliant assholes or something.
Well said.
Yes, and I think that I don't look back at that. Yeah. The fact is, these folks need to work together every day. Yeah. And they need to love what they're doing. And there are a number of brilliant non-assholes out there, and you kind of just have to wait and see.
I think it's well said, obviously, but it's, like one person can really kill that culture and actually drive away all your the ones that actually you enjoy working with, right? And so, like I do believe in the hire slow, fire fast type of perspective, but. So what you're doing is you're actually, you're like, man, that person actually has a great history or talent set, but we're not hiring them because I can see where this is going to go and it's just going to take the team down.
Right.
Like that is
it's hard, and it's hard to predict, to be honest, right? So, we have a conversation, even if you come in for a couple of days, we don't know exactly what you're truly like, but you're gonna try your best. And you have to admit that you're gonna make mistakes with hiring, right?
You're totally right, and this is where I think it's really difficult because how do you know what that person's gonna be like in a year after like even 1 or 2 days of interviews? Right. But I do believe, and I think this is the nuance of, I think a leader in the company is really quickly. I think you generally get a gist of who that person is, like generally, right? And what they're generally going to be like 80-90% of the time. Of course, when they're put under stress, they might break. But I think your gut feeling initially in those interviews tells you, okay, yes or no. Obviously, what's going to happen in 1 or 2 years, like you never know, right? But I think that's the risk you have to take on employees when you do hire them.
And I totally agree with you. And in a sense, hiring, continuing this endless analogy, right? Like, when you first start, go into the dating scene, it's like anybody who will go out with me, I'll go out with them. And the danger with like starting a company when you have like 1, 2, 3 people is that you're so desperate to hire, and perhaps you don't even have funding, and you're trying to convince people to come, that you're gonna make that mistake. Take anything, right? Go out with anybody who wants to go out with you, and then finding them is much harder. So when you said, hire slow, fire fast type thing, but it's still an emotionally very hard process. So there are trade-offs. The idea might go away, might become obsolete, but it's good to start thinking about culture from the very beginning.
Yeah, that's really interesting. Well, yeah, we're about done. Short period of time, but hey, thanks for
Great
stopping
by.
I really appreciate it.
Yeah.